Hello friendos and randos, welcome back to another video. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the O7 meta, and then after that I wanted to talk about the ban list. I wanted to talk about what effects the ban list will have on the meta for O7, because I know some of you guys have locals with very eager people to play with the bans in effect already, and I know that nationals will be under the O7 with ban list format, which is also very silly. But it is what it is. And then we'll also have to look at O8, and then I will also be looking at the Eastern meta right now, the O8.5 meta. So I think there's a lot to cover. Let's talk about it right away. I think first and foremost, let's talk about the O7 meta before the ban list. I think the top dogs for O7 are pretty clear. So I think this is the clear top 3 for OP07 pre-ban. I think other than these 3, there's a lot of other decks that were doing really well, in the West at least. Nami, NL, Reiju. I know Reiju had a top 8 in one of these tournaments. I know Dofi did well. I think Moria is always good. Boa is good. Bonnie is good. So let me just move them up to the correct spots. So Moria, Boa, Bonnie. So I think O7 is a meta where a lot of things are really viable. Am I forgetting anyone? I think for now that's basically it. That's basically the meta for O7. So Law, Luffy, and then the rest of these decks are all like tier 1. I would say probably like Dofi and Reiju would be a tier down, because their bad matchups are like 2 out of 3 of the top few. In Dofi's case, I think Apilo is winnable, but he should be favored, and then loses to Lucci, and then Reiju loses to Luffy and Law. So that's probably my take on the meta. I would say the top of A is probably like Moria and Bonnie, and then I think that's probably all the relevant leaders. I suppose you can throw in Perona as well, probably here, and then I think other than that, I don't feel like there's any other notable leaders in the top, like top 10 or so. I think Zoro is also playable. I know Law did well in one of those tournaments, but I'm still going to say it's around here, at least when this is meta. So that's my current opinion. Boa worse than Dolphin? I don't know, man. I feel like Boa has better matchups into Red Purple Law and BY, and I guess Lucci is equally bad, but we'll just put her here. I think in the West it didn't perform, but in Japan it was pretty good. Okay, yeah, that's my opinion for the O7 meta before the bans. And then of course with the bans happening, we have Stage and Apilo going to the ban zone, and that pushes a lot of decks that were, I guess, negative into these 2 matchups a bit further up. So I think Luffy was already pretty good because of the matchup into Lucci being so significantly positive, and then the Apilo matchup was actually fairly winnable if you were good at the deck. But the most gate kept by Law, I think, is definitely Nami and Bonnie. I think these 2 decks receive a huge buff, and of course Reiju. These 3 decks receive a huge buff by Law just being removed from the meta entirely. So I'm definitely bumping Reiju up a slot. So I'm going to pull everyone down to A first, and then after that we'll think about it, like how things move. So similarly, these 2 decks suffered a lot against Lucci because of Stage being able to remove their board very consistently, and that also applies to NL as well. But I don't think that's enough to push them up all the way to S yet. For now, I think Dofi and Boa, their main good matchups are going to be BY Luffy, and then I think they're also positive into Nami because you can tag Gion. But I don't feel like they are positive into Reiju. I think Moria is still going to be a little bit favored tempo-wise. I think Lucci is still going to be a little bit favored tempo-wise into these 2 decks as well. I cannot safely put them in S tier at the moment. I think they're still going to be like maybe top 5 at maximum. Their best matchup is definitely going to be BY Luffy though. I think for now, with the bans, the biggest effect on it will definitely be Nami being a lot better now. And I think in the West in general, Nami was already a lot better because there wasn't a lot of Red Purple Law players, or if there were, then I don't think there were many that were topping. Probably gate kept by number one, I guess the inconsistency of the deck, and number two, I think in general a lot of the the top tier players were on more consistent decks like BY Luffy. For example, I think Clyde is on BY Luffy. I think Cross is on Lucci. Quite a lot of other renowned I think players are on more consistent decks at least. But on top of that, I think Nami has a pretty decent matchup spread into most of the decks here. I think in general, Nami checks all of the slower decks on this board, with the exception of I think Moria, because of Perona being very good at keeping hand size and managing hand size low. Other than that, I think it has a really bad matchup into Reiju, into Boa, into Doffy. Boa and Doffy primarily because of Gion tech. Reiju is just bad even without the Gion tech. So that's my current opinion. And I think Reiju wise, looking at the entire spread here, right, the only negative matchup I can think of for Reiju is BY Luffy, and other than that, I think it's also negative into Bonnie. But this is also depending on how good the Bonnie players are, as well as the different build that they're running. So I'll tell you from experience that the only real way to really lose hard against Bonnie is if they drop 9 cost Zoro, because the deck just doesn't have an answer to 9 cost Zoro. So that's my current opinion of where Reiju stands in the meta. I truly think that every matchup here is positive except for these two, which is Bonnie and BY, and everything else is definitely winnable. So for now, I'm going to put her as S tier. She's going to be the first S tier deck in 07.5. Now, on top of that, I think with that said, the deck that does well into Reiju is probably going to be S tier as well. So I'm going to put BY Luffy here. I think BY Luffy has a very good matchup spread. It beats both Moria and Lucci. I think it also does well into Bonnie. I think it can do well into Nami if you know how to play the matchup. And in terms of negatively favored, I think NL, Doffy, and Boa are negative. So I think that's still a very positive matchup spread. That's like 5 out of the 9 other top 10 decks. So I'm going to put it at S tier as well. Then, of course, with that said, the last S tier deck is going to be the deck that counters BY Luffy, so Bonnie is going to be here as well. So this is my current top 3 for OP07 post-ban. So I think Reiju beats Bonnie, Bonnie beats Luffy, Luffy beats Reiju. And then they all have the different positive matchups as well. I think Bonnie does well into Nami and NL with 9 cost Zoro. I think Bonnie does well into Doffy and Boa. Again with 9 cost Zoro, as well as with Hawkins. The only out that they have is Gravity Blade, and they are not running Gravity Blade Surger, so it's going to be not very consistent for them to beat into the Bonnie. I think 8 cost Kate will still be a very strong card against both of these cards, both of these decks, with Boa having an easier time because Boa does tend to run the bouncing 10 cost Kaido, and does run more 10 cost Kaido in general, whereas Luffy, most of them, they either play a couple of 10 cost Kaido or they cap out at 6 cost Boa, so they are going to have a lot harder of a time to deal with it. And again, I think 9 cost Zoro is just very, very strong, especially in the current meta where it's not as consistent to be able to clear 9 cost Zoro on the clapback. Reiju is positive into Bonnie in my opinion, except for the 9 cost Zoro. So the main thing is that the matchup is really dependent on whether the Bonnie draws 9 cost Zoro or not, but in between that point, I think if you build, for example, my version without the Foxy Pirates package, without the Foxy Pirates package, then it actually does pretty well. The main reason is that by playing Judge down, you're actually negating Bonnie's leader effect by being able to rest one of their Dawn. And a lot of Bonnie players tend to forget that Judge can do that, so they won't be leaving like 2 Dawn open. And even still, if you're forcing them to leave 2 Dawn open, they can't do things like play the Zoro safely. They also can't do things like play 8 cost K and attach 1 Dawn. They also can't do things like just spend all their Dawn and then leave Urush to untap it. So for me, the Judge is really key in this matchup. The Judge is really key in both of these matchups, which is why I don't agree that the Foxy Pirates version is good for 07.5. The main reason being, again, you need that 8 cost body against the BY Luffy. Other than that, you need the Dawn tapping against Bonnie. You also need it against Nami. And against the black removal decks, you need the board flood playing 4 bodies at once in order to dodge high cost removal. Against NL, you need the pressure that it provides. Against Doffy and Boa, you need to match their board spam as well. So for me, I think the Judge build is definitely the way to go. I'll be showing the Reiju build that I've been testing for the past couple of days since the Banlist announcement, and I think it does pretty well as well. So I'll show you guys what I'm thinking of. And other than that, that's basically the list that I'm thinking of at the moment. I think on top of all of this, I think Zoro and Red Green Law are also pretty decent choices moving into this meta. The main reason I don't want to put them on the same level at A right now is I'm not very confident of their matchups into either of the black leaders. I'm also not confident of their matchups into NL. And I think personally from testing Red Green Law into Red Green Law into Doflamingo, I think Doflamingo is also just stronger than Red Green Law at the moment. Like in terms of board flooding, being able to play more bodies at once. Doflamingo can do that with just Jinbei on board, whereas I think Red Green Law has to take a lot of extra steps to hit that point, and it doesn't really feel that good. Similarly with Zoro, I think the board flooding is strong, but at the same time he isn't as fast at doing it, and it's much easier to remove his board as compared to like Dofi having 5-6, 5-6 on board. So for now, I think if you would like to play either of these decks, I feel like their matchup spread is very similar to Dofi in that they are both probably positive into BY Luffy, and then maybe even into the other two, but it really depends. For one, I will say that I think Zoro is slightly favored into Reiju because of the amount of board flood that you can have. But again, this is because with the 07 build, I think more likely than not you'll be playing like Whitebeard Pirates focused, which is still a little bit slower and not that strong. And I don't think it matches board flood on any level with Doflamingo and Jinbei or Reiju and Judge. So for now, I think still at B tier. Decks that I think can resurface as well because of the bans. I think Katakuri is pretty decent. I expect him to be probably somewhere in the A tier as well, but for now I'm going to put him here at B. I think his primary gatekeeper was definitely the Red Purple Law. It was way too aggro, it just pushed him out very, very quickly. Katakuri's good matchups are of course Nami and NL. I think he has a decent-ish matchup into either of the black decks, especially if you're running a high trigger focus variant. I think he's also slightly favored into either of the blue decks. But I feel like his matchup into Bonnie is not very good. His matchup into Reiju is extremely bad. And the matchup into BY is maybe slightly favored depending on how well you draw, as well as how many 10 cost mums you have, because that's going to be the key deciding factor. So the main reason that matchup is not that great is because your trigger bodies don't really help that much. And also your leader effect is kind of not really usable until the later stages of the game because you do want to starve them out. So for me right now, I think not favored into two of the top three. So for now, we'll put it at B. Okay. I think other than that, I don't feel like there's any other leaders that would really resurface. I guess Yamato is also a feasible option. Yamato is decent. The main reason that I think Yamato is not that great is that its NL matchup is bad. Its black matchup, like basically any matchup into a 5-life leader is not good. So Bonnie is not that great. Either of the black leaders are not that great. The blue leaders are not very great either. So for now, I don't really think it's that good at the moment. But I think it has a decent enough matchup into Reiju that you can still try to pick it and try to cheese the Reiju or even the Luffy as well. Abi Sabo is coming out again in the West. Abi Sabo, I think Abi Sabo is playable. It has a reasonable leader effect now that bottom decking is a lot less prevalent since Abi Law is gone. I think, of course, the blue decks will still have access to bottom deck, but it will have that ability to protect its board a little bit better. And now that Abi Sabo has Moria as well. Previously, I think from 05 to 07, you couldn't really play Abi Sabo because either Sakazuki or Red Purple Law was meta, so there was definitely a auto loss matchup in like tier 1. But at the moment, I think I don't have enough experience to test with it and tell you whether or not it's good or not. The last two leaders I wanted to talk about for 07.5 are Purple Luffy and Red Purple Luffy. I think both of these decks had a reasonable matchup into Red Purple Law and not such a great matchup into Lucci. I think Red Purple Luffy in particular has a really bad matchup into NL as well, which is one of the reasons why I think he's not very good, because he loses to I want to say normie, like not very good deck. But I think it's definitely possible to play them. Red Purple Luffy in particular can do well into Reiju, I think, especially if you're playing 9-cost Newgate, you're playing Dragon, you're going to have a lot of big bodies, which Reiju cannot really answer very well. And you also have 9-cost Newgate, which will give you enough defense for Reiju to not really be able to answer you, especially if they're playing the Foxy package. A lot of Reiju players I've seen are not very efficient with their Dawn. I think it's similar to RP Law players where they don't really know when to go up to high Dawn counts, and that makes it easier time for 6k base leader. Similarly for Purple Luffy, if you're playing 7-cost kit, again, Reiju doesn't really have an answer for that. I think against BY Luffy, being able to ramp up to big bodies, and then before their 10 Dawn turn, having, let's say, 6k vanilla, a 9-cost Kaido or a 9-cost big body, and another maybe another 9-cost big body would be very good in order to hit into their 5k base leader or even their 7k base leader and force a lot of hand cuts. Of course, the deck can also still run Blocker Law, which will also be good into both of these decks, as well as Reiju if they don't manage their Dawn correctly. So I think it's a reasonable choice. His negative matchups are probably going to be Moria, as well as I believe the blue decks are not going to be that great of a matchup for Luffy, especially if you're running Magellan and you're going to be relying on that Magellan. That Magellan does do very good in delaying some of the big bodies for Luffy. For Bonnie, you can delay the Judge turn by one turn as well. So a lot of good ways to use the Magellan at a good timing. I think it's very similar to when Bonnie would play 5-cost Bonnie to delay one of your important bodies or important turns. I want to say that it can be A tier, but I'm not 100% certain yet, so I'm going to leave it there for now. And I think that being said, that should be all of the leaders that I think are going to be relevant for now for the 07.5 meta. There's going to be definitely more changes as more regionals happen, more chefs come out of the kitchen, do their thing. But for now, this is my 07.5 tier list. If I were to pick one of these decks to be at the top, I think Reiju is at the top because of the high roll potential that the deck has. When you giga high roll, I think you can beat any deck here. I think definitely, especially with the version that I'm running, I think it's very, very good. Even in the later stages of the game, if you know how to manage your Dawn, if you know how to manage your turns well, I think you are going to be a very good you are going to have a very good shot into this environment. Personally, I feel the only bad matchup that Reiju has right now is actually BY Luffy and maybe a good Bonnie player, but otherwise it's not going to be bad into any of these other decks. That being said, the reason why these two are S is that they have a reasonable enough matchup into Reiju, or they have a good out into Reiju, and I want to say that Bonnie is negative into Reiju unless you play 9-cost solo. So that's why for now it is Bonnie beats BY, then BY beats Reiju, then Reiju beats Bonnie. But if more Bonnies are playing 9-cost solo, then that's probably going to be two bad matchups for the Reiju now. Right, okay, yeah, so that's I think the current meta for 07.5. That's basically what I think will happen. And then now we're going to talk a little bit about 08, which is when the bans actually take place for most of the West that are not going to Nationals.